Welcome to Time Traveling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every episode of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Paddy. This week we join the Doctor, Romana and K9 as they continue their adventure in E-Space, this time coming face to Fang with a creature from Myth in State of Decay. As usual, we'll be discussing the Doctor, companions and the villains and giving our thoughts on the story as a whole.
We'd also love to hear your thoughts on this story and on any other story that we discuss on the show. So to join the discussion, you can check us out at Time Teamp, that's TIMETEAMP, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at timetravelingteamp@teamproductions.com. Now though, as per usual, Paddington will go over to you first for the story recap, please.
Thank you very much. Part 1. In a castle overlooking a rustic village, the ruling elite prepare for an event called the Time of Selection. The three rulers, Zargo, Alcon and Camilla, all of whom are pale, red-eyed individuals, debate as to what the most important criteria are for their selections, in order to appease their master, the Great One. They give their orders to their guard captain, Hybris, who departs to follow their instructions. Later, in a tavern in the village, Hybris and his men enter to find a line of candidates waiting for them, having been selected by the village headman, Ivo. Hybris goes through the candidates but selects Ivo's son, Carl, who is sitting down amongst those not chosen. Carl attempts to resist, pleading with Hybris not to follow his orders, but he is knocked down and captured when he attempts to flee. Hybris guiltily says he must follow his orders before departing with the selected candidates. Ivo dismisses those not selected and then consoles his wife. Meanwhile, on the TARDIS, the Doctor and Romana continue their search for a way out of E-Space. Romana points out that there doesn't appear to be a lot of planets in the areas that they have scanned so far, but the Doctor says that something will turn up. K9 alerts them then to the location of a nearby habitable planet. He says there is evidence of high technology, but the local populace seem to be of a less advanced nature. They land on the planet and the Doctor and Romana go out to view their surroundings. In the distance, they see the village and the castle. Romana says that there doesn't appear to be any evidence of the advanced technology K9 spoke of. The Doctor suggests taking a further look around and tells K9 to stay behind to guard the TARDIS whilst he tries to locate another CVE. Unbeknownst to the Doctor, he is being listened to by Adric, who stowed away on the TARDIS. The Doctor and Romana then make their way through the woods and encounter a startled villager who flees from them in terror. Back in the village, Ivo gives out to Hybris over the fact that the villagers are not receiving sufficient food in order for them to do their work. He says that they are too weak and as a result their harvests have been poor. Suddenly they are interrupted by the arrival of the Doctor and Romana, and he bows to them in a state of shock before asking them where they came from. Hybris stands to attention and asks them what their command is, all of which confuses the two Time Lords. The Doctor presses on and asks if there are any scientists in the village, but when Ivo expresses confusion at the word, he uses medieval terminology, which Ivo recognizes, and he replies that such practices are forbidden. Hybris tells him that he must go, leaving the Time Lords to ask about their other settlements in the area, but Ivo says that this is the only settlement. The Doctor asks who lives in the castle, and Ivo, thinking that he is being tested, says that he is a loyal servant of the Lords and has served them faithfully so that they will protect the village from the wasting. The Doctor seems to recognize the term and presses Ivo for more information, but he says that he has work to do and they leave. After they go, Ivo pulls a communication device from out of a hiding place and contacts someone named Kalmar, telling them about the strange visitors and their search for scientists. Back on the TARDIS, Adric emerges from his hiding place and is confronted by K9, who demands to know what he is doing there. Adric says that he stowed away so that he could see the universe, and then asks where the Doctor is. K9 says that they have gone to look for help in getting out of E-Space. Adric says he will go and find them, but when K9 tries to stop him, he tricks the robot dog into letting him go by saying that as a stowaway, he shouldn't be on the TARDIS at all. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Romana make their way through the woods in search of another village when they are suddenly surrounded by a group of hooded figures. In the castle, Hybris reports the presence of the Doctor and Romana to the Lords, and they angrily refute his statement that they are also Lords. Zargo and Camilla order him to send out more patrols to find them before the rebels in the area do. However, Alcon says that there will be no need of the patrols and he will instead use his bats, which he calls his servants, to find them. In the woods, the Doctor and Romana are led to an underground cavern where they find more men attending to antiquated computers and bits of machinery. One of them, Kalmar, asks the Doctor if he is a scientist after someone mentions that he is called the Doctor, but another of his men, Tarek, instead demands to know who they are and where they come from. The Doctor ignores the demand and instead goes to check one of the computers that Kalmar was attending to. Tarek says that the machines are useless as they have been unable to provide them with weapons with which to fight the Lords, and Romana asks how long they have been in power. Kalmar says that they have ruled from the castle for at least 1,000 years. The Doctor says that according to Ivo, without the Lords they would be doomed to face the wasting, and then asks what it is, but Kalmar stops Tarek before he can explain. Meanwhile, Adric arrives at the tavern in the village and attempts to steal some food, but he is stopped by Ivo's wife Marta. Adric asks if she has seen the Doctor and Romana, and she says that they went to the castle. Ivo returns and tells Adric to get out, but Marta says it is too dangerous to send him out at that late hour. Ivo reluctantly agrees, and Marta gives Adric some of Carl's old clothes before letting him get some food. Back in the underground cavern, Kalmar and another rebel, Veros, tell the Doctor and Romana about how they fled from the Lords and have been hiding in secret ever since. They say that all forms of science and education are outlawed, and the people only exist to work in the fields for the Lords. They briefly mention the time of selection, saying that those chosen are picked to work in the castle. The Doctor then announces that he's managed to get one of the computers properly working, after giving it a bit of TLC, and Romana reads the screen, saying that it is a crew manifest of an exploration vessel from Earth called the Hydrax. Romana says the ship must have come through the CVE as well, before reading out the crew's names of Captain Miles Sharkey, NAB Officer Laura McMillan, and Science Officer Anthony O'Connor. She brings up their pictures, and Tarek, who was previously one of the castle's guards, says that they are Zargo, Camilla, and Alcon. The Doctor says that he and Romana should go and meet them, and Kalmar agrees, telling and objecting Varos that they are free to go. Whilst they are making their way through the woods, they are suddenly swarmed by bats, one of which bites the Doctor. The two Time Lords flee as the sky fills with more and more bats. Part 2. Romana points out that the bats seem to be flocking away in the direction of the castle. Suddenly Habris and his men appear and tell them that they have been summoned to meet the Lords. They are brought to the castle and they are met by Zargo and Camilla. They ask why the Time Lords are there, saying that they know that they are travellers from space. They offer them something to eat and drink, and the Doctor comments on their luxurious surroundings, comparing them to the conditions that the villagers live under. He comments on the rebel forces, and Camilla says that they do not appreciate what she, Zargo, and Alcon do for them. Romana then nicks her hand when she breaks her glass during a shared toast with the Doctor. Camilla asks to see the wound, but Romana says that she is fine before joining the Doctor in his conversation with Zargo about how each group seemed to be stranded in E-space. Meanwhile, in the tavern, Marta explains the time of selection to Adric and the status quo between the villagers and the Lords. Adric says that they should stand up to the Lords, but an irate Ivo says that all opposition to them has been crushed so far. Suddenly Habris and his men arrive and say that there is another selection to be made, this time overseen by Alcon. Alcon inspects the villagers and is drawn to Adric when he notices his mental defense. Alcon orders Adric to follow him, but the young boy asks why he should obey him. Alcon smiles as he promises that Adric will have wealth and power over the entire planet. Back in the castle, the Doctor and Romana comment that the evolutionary track on the planet seems to be going backwards, with the villagers becoming more and more primitive with each generation. He says that there is some force at play on the planet, and the rebels believe the Lords to be responsible for it. Zargo says that the rebels have overestimated them and that they are simply rulers by necessity. He says that the ship of state must have a pilot, and Camilla tells him to stop talking, but the Doctor has already picked up on his phrasing. He tells him about viewing the Hydrax's manifest, and Zargo says that it is impossible, as the records were meant to have been destroyed. Camilla again tells him to be silent, but they are interrupted by Habris, who says that Alcon has summoned them as the time of a rising is at hand. Zargo and Camilla depart, telling the two Time Lords to stay in the throne room. After they go, the Doctor and Romana deduce that the Lords are the descendants of the crew of the Hydrax, whose names have been distorted throughout the generations. The Doctor also says that the castle is actually the Hydrax and that the throne room is the bridge. He starts to look around for an inspection hatch, and Romana points out that it is under Camilla's throne. The Doctor then enters the hatch and calls Romana on after him. Down in the lower catacombs, Alcon shows an entranced Adric to Zargo and Camilla and tells them that he will make a good addition to their ranks. However, they say that the sacrifices were to be selected from the villagers and point out his possible connection to the Doctor and Romana. Alcon says that the villagers will never be suitable candidates, as the necessary traits have been bred out of them through the generations. Zargo insists that the Doctor and the others are too dangerous to deal with, and says that they should be killed and fed to the Great One. However, Camilla supports Alcon and says that they must follow the Great One's orders and grow their numbers. In the rebel base, Kalmar tells everyone that the Doctor and Romana have been captured. Tarek and Varos insist on launching a rescue attempt, saying that the Time Lords are their best hope at defeating the Lords. However, Kalmar says that they should wait and bide their time until they are properly prepared to take on the Lords. Tarek then suggests sneaking in by himself, citing his previous experience as a guard in the castle. He says he will find them and bring them back with the knowledge on how to defeat the lords. Back in the castle, the Doctor and Romana's disappearance is discovered, and Zargo demands that Habris find them on pain of death. After Habris leaves, Camilla notices the open hatch and says the Doctor is more dangerous than they first thought. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Romana discover a secondary flight deck on the ship, and the Doctor says it is designed to separate from the main craft for planetary exploration. He notices that there is still some power in the fuel cells, and Romana says that they could pilot it away. The Doctor tells her to be quiet as he hears a slow thumping sound echoing throughout the ship. He leads her further into the bowels of the ship and says that there is a creature, which is the source of the thumping sound, nesting nearby somewhere under the castle, and is using it as a feeding ground. He turns on a light source, and a startled Romana sees dozens of mummified corpses in bunks lining the walls. The Doctor notices pipes from each of the bunks, and he follows them to the fuel hatches, which he opens to see that they are full of blood. They continue down to the engines of the ship and climb through the exhaust ports into an enormous cavern. The thumping sound grows louder, and the Doctor says that it is the creature's heartbeat. Romana spots pipes carrying the blood leading away from the ship, and they follow them. Suddenly, the Doctor stops short and begins to talk about vampire lore, unintentionally frightening Romana, who asks where they are. Alcon suddenly appears and says that they are in the place of resting before welcoming them to his domain. Part 3. The Doctor asks if there is a possibility of a guided tour, but Alcon warns him to be more respectful of his surroundings. He asks the Doctor and Romana to join him and the others as lords so they can go back to the real space universe and conquer it. Romana asks if he knows how to get out of E-space, and Alcon says that the Great One will show them the way out, as he is the one who brought them in. The Doctor then reveals that Alcon is actually O'Connor, and not his descendant. Alcon says that he was the first one that the Great One reached out to, and he gave them all unending life in return for their feeding of him. Romana quietly suggests that they play along with Alcon's demands until they get the information on how to escape E-space, but the Doctor says it is too dangerous. Alcon says that they should join him as Adric did, surprising them to the youth's presence on the planet. They refuse, and Alcon says that they will either serve the Great One or be fed to him. The Doctor says that he will instead destroy the Great One, and tells Romana to run. However, before he can follow, Alcon uses his mental abilities to stop him and attempts to bend him to his will. He is distracted when Romana hurls a stalagmite at him, but he easily batters it aside. The Doctor tells Romana to cover her eyes, and he tells Alcon that his tricks won't work on them due to their Time Lord genealogy. Alcon is stunned at this revelation and calls them the ancient enemies as they flee, but they are stopped by the arrival of Zargo and Camilla. They tell the Doctor and Romana that they will drain them of their blood, but Alcon suddenly tells everyone to be quiet as the Great One begins to commune with him. Alcon then announces that the Great One has decreed that they will be fed to him at the time of his arising. They lead the Doctor and Romana back up to the main castle and hand them over to a group of guards who lead them away. Unbeknownst to them, this is all being observed by Tarek, who has managed to sneak into the castle and steal a guard's uniform. He watches as Zargo and Camilla go into their private chamber, leaving him to plan his next steps. In their chambers, Zargo expresses his concern that Alcon is withholding his abilities that he was meant to share with them, but Camilla says that they will all be made equal when the Great One arises. However, Zargo says that he is still afraid as the Doctor's presence could disrupt everything. In their cell, the Doctor tells Romana about a story his old master, Campo Rinpoche, once told him about a race of giant vampires. He says that they were so powerful, just one of them could suck the life out of an entire planet. He says the Time Lords fought them in a long and bloody war, which caused the Time Lords' current pacifism. He says that according to the story, all but one of the vampires were destroyed, and the survivor escaped to parts unknown, which Romana says could have been E-space. Meanwhile, outside the cell, Tarek arrives, telling the guard on duty that he's been sent to relieve him. The guard recognizes him, and Tarek attacks him. Inside the cell, Romana asks when the legend was supposed to have taken place, and the Doctor says that it happened in the days of Rassilon's youth. She says that during her tenure in the Bureau of Ancient Records on the Citadel, she recalls seeing an entry about copies of the book The Record of Rassilon being installed on Type 40 TARDISes. The Doctor smiles at this, telling her that she is wonderful, and she graciously accepts the compliment. The Doctor then signals for the guard watching them to come near him, and when he does, he knocks him out. He tells Romana they need to escape, but he is suddenly hit by the door as Tarek bursts in, having overcome the guard outside. He leads Romana and the stunned Doctor away. When they reach the exit, the Doctor tells Tarek to go to Kalmar and tell him to prepare for an attack on the castle, but not to move until he gives the signal. Romana then reminds the Doctor about Adric, and the Doctor asks Tarek where he could be. Tarek says that he will be most likely in the inner sanctum, and the Doctor asks to be taken there, but Romana says that she will go as the Doctor needs to get the information from the TARDIS. In the Rebel base, Kalmar uses one of the machines to scan the surrounding countryside, and Varys says that he sees someone moving on the screen. He prepares to ambush whoever it is, but sees that it is Ivo, and Kalmar tells him to come in. He angrily gives out to Ivo for not following their communication protocols, but Ivo angrily says that none of that matters now as Karl is dead, having been fed upon by the Lords. He calls Kalmar and the others cowards, but then says that something will be happening at the castle that night. He says that he intends to attack the castle with his own followers, again chastising Kalmar when he says that they should wait until they are properly prepared. He warns Kalmar that if his attack fails, then he should expect the Lords to attack the rebel base next. The Doctor arrives back at the TARDIS, where K9 attempts to tell him about Adric, but the Doctor says that he already knows. He tells K9 that he needs his help in recovering the record of Rassilon from the data core. However, after much searching, K9 says that he can find no reference to the book nor anything to do with vampires. K9 reminds the despondent Doctor that there could be a hard copy of the book, and the Doctor rushes to his library. He comes back with a trolley of data cards and finds the book. He enters it into the console reader and finds the entry about the war with the vampires. It confirms that the king of the vampires had somehow managed to escape the last battle that destroyed the rest of his race. He reads a decree made by Rassilon saying that any Time Lord that found the king vampire had to destroy it, sacrificing themselves if necessary. K9 asks how the vampires can be killed, and the Doctor finds an entry that says that energy weapons were useless as the vampires merely absorbed the energy. He says that Rassilon ordered the construction of attack fighters that could fire steel bolts and strike the vampires in their only vulnerable spot, their heart. In the castle, Tarek brings Romana at knife point to the entrance to the inner sanctum and tells the guard that Zargo wants to see her. The guard says that he has his orders not to let anyone in, but Tarek says that he has his own orders. He takes the passkey from the guard, but he uses it wrong, but Romana corrects him. The guard becomes suspicious, but Romana distracts him long enough for Tarek to knock him out. They then make their way into the inner sanctum and see Zargo and Camilla sleeping. Tarek says that they should kill them now, but Romana says that they don't have any weapons that can harm them according to vampire lore. They search around for Adric and find him unconscious on a nearby bed, wearing similar clothes to Zargo and Camilla. Romana tries to wake him up and he begins to groggily come around. He says he vaguely remembers what Alcon said about the arising ceremony, but Romana says that they need to get out of the room. However, they are confronted by Zargo and Camilla, and Tarek attacks them. Zargo picks him up and hurls him into a wall, and he and Camilla then go to feed him. However, they see that he is dead, and Camilla reminds Zargo that they cannot feed on dead bodies. They advance on Romana and Adric, who throws Tarek's knife into Zargo. However, he easily removes it, and they see that there is no blood on it. The two vampire lords then advance on their prey. Part 4. Alcon arrives and orders Zargo and Camilla to leave them alone, saying that Adric will soon be one of them, and Romana will be fed to the Great One. He has the prisoners put in chains and says that they must all be made ready for the Great One's arising, which will take place that night. The trio go into a state of rapture at the concept of being let loose into real space to feed on the countless worlds there. Meanwhile, on the TARDIS, the Doctor brainstorms on how to convince the rebels to follow him in an attack on the castle. He decides to pilot the TARDIS into their base, and K9 reassures him that due to the relatively small nature of E-space in comparison to real space, the short journey should be no problem. He arrives and interrupts an argument between Varos and Kalmar about the course of action to take in the wake of Ivo's plans to attack the castle. The Doctor then rallies them to his cause by giving a paraphrased version of Henry V's Crispin Day speech and say that they should join Ivo's forces. However, Kalmar is skeptical of the Doctor's claims about the King Vampire, and the Doctor says that if he had the right equipment he could prove it. Kalmar mentions the scanner he got to work earlier, and the Doctor uses it to show them the giant humanoid bat-like figure of the King Vampire in the caverns below the castle. Convinced of the truth, Kalmar tells Varos to contact Ivo. Back in the castle, Adric berates Romana for her failure to rescue him and states his belief that the Doctor will save himself and leave in the TARDIS. Romana is outraged at this and begins to lambast him for stowing away the TARDIS in the first place, but he ignores her and says that he is going to take Alcon's offer of power and immortality. The Lords arrive and Romana tries to get Adric to see sense, but he says that he has lost enough of his family due to the Time Lords already. Alcon then orders them to be taken away to be prepared for their respective ceremonies. In the rebel base, the Doctor goes over an attack plan with the rebels and the recently arrived Ivo. The Doctor says that the biggest problem will be dealing with the Great One, as they must fashion a weapon big enough to kill him. I would suggest sharpening a tree trunk, but the Doctor says that he would need to find something to fire it and generate enough force in order to pierce the King Vampire's heart. I would then suggest building a catapult, and the Doctor suddenly has a brainwave. He tells the leaders to gather their best men, who will be placed under the command of K9 in order to launch a commando raid on the castle. Despite their skepticism, they follow his orders and make their way to the castle. Once there, K9 puts their doubts at ease as his nose laser helps dispatch the guards that tried to prevent them from gaining access to the throne room. However, they see that it is abandoned, and the Doctor says that the arising ceremony must have begun already. He says that he is pushing the next part of his plan to action and tells them to defend the throne room until K9 signals for them to leave. Ivo protested having to follow the robot dog's orders, but the Doctor insists that he do as he is told and only leave when K9 says so. He then tells them to rendezvous at the exterior entrance to the cave system and to rescue Adric or Romana if they see them. In the underground cavern, the Lords, followed by Adric, a few guards, and a hypnotized Romana, arrive to commence the ceremony. Adric whispers to Romana about a plan that he has, but they are interrupted by the arrival of Habris, who informs the Lords about the attack on the castle. He begs Alcon to send his bats to aid them, but Alcon refuses, saying that he has need of them. Habris says that he and his men will die, but Alcon hypnotizes him, saying that is the point of guards. Habris leaves in a trance, and Alcon reassures Zargo and Camilla that nothing can stop them. Habris goes back to the throne room, where his men are locked in combat with the rebels. He is confronted by Ivo, who vows vengeance on him for his son. Meanwhile, the Doctor has gone through the maintenance hatch again and arrives in the launch bay for the Hydrax's scout ships. Down in the cavern, Romana is laid out on a sacrificial altar. As Alcon calls for the ceremony to start, Adric rushes at him with a knife, but he is held in place by Alcon's gaze, who orders Adric to be taken away. He then goes back to the ceremony and summons his bats into the caves so that they can feed on Romana. Back in the Hydrax, the Doctor is in the third scout ship as the other two of the ship's systems were too degraded. He activates the flight controls and sets it on a predetermined course. K9 detects the ship's engines and orders the rebels to flee the castle. Down in the cavern, the ceremony is interrupted by the rumble of the engines, and the bats flee from Romana's body. She comes out of her trance, and Adric helps her off the altar, saying they need to get out of there whilst Alcon and the others are distracted. They are joined by the Doctor, who climbed out the Hydrax's exhaust port. Suddenly, a large clawed hand bursts up from the cavern floor, and Alcon rejoices as he says the Great One is rising. The Doctor tells Romana and Adric not to panic, as he explains what he did with the scout ship. They watch as it reaches its apex and then falls back to the surface, where its nose cone pierces the cavern roof and plunges into the Great One's heart, killing him. The Lords turn to attack the Doctor, but before they can harm him, they begin to rapidly age now that their master is dead, and they crumble to dust. The Doctor is again joined by Romana and Adric, who apologizes for his earlier actions and explains that it was all a ruse so that he could rescue Romana. Romana jokingly uses his earlier words against him, highlighting his failure to save her. They are then joined by K9 and the others, who ask about the Vampire King and their lords, and the Doctor explains what he did with the scout ship. The rebels thank the Doctor for his aid, and Ivo offers an apology to K9 for his earlier comments. They then all make their way back to the rebel base, where the Doctor manages to fix some of the equipment that would allow Kalmar and the remaining scientists to get their people back on the path to progress. He says that one day they will hopefully be able to get back to Earth after their ancestors were brought into E-space on the Hydrax. The Doctor then bids the rebels farewell before telling a protesting Adric as they climb into the TARDIS that they're going to bring him back to the Starliner. End of the story. So, I'm feeling a bit peckish. I'm going to get a bite and we will put it over to the trivia spot.
Okay, so the air date for State of Decay is the 22nd of November to the 13th of December 1980. The writer is Terrance Dicks. Been a while since we've seen Terrance's work. This is writing credit 5 of 6 for Terrance, though obviously he was script editor for a long time and he did a lot of novelizations. We previously saw his writing work in The War Games, Robot, The Brain of Morbius, and Horror of Fang Rock. We'll see his work for a final time in The Five Doctors. The director for the story is Peter Moffat. This is the first of 6 directing credits for Peter. We'll see his work again in The Visitation, Mordred Undead, The Five Doctors, The Twin Dilemma, and The Two Doctors. Peter passed away in 2007. Terrance actually wrote this script 3 years earlier, so the story is based off of that older script. And When Peter Moffat saw this original script, he loved it, which is exactly what John Nathan Turner wanted. However, when Peter received Christopher Bidmead's adapted form of the script, because obviously 3 years and then I had to put up to speed, he found it completely different. It no longer had the gothic atmosphere that he was drawn to in the original, and it just wasn't what he wanted. And so he told John Nathan Turner that he no longer wanted to direct it. It was either I direct the version you originally presented with or do nothing. And so in order to have Peter do the job, the original story was reinstated. Though obviously updated for the characters, whatever, but the story is fundamentally the same. Both Terrence and Peter continued to be at odds with Christopher Bidmead. They wanted to emphasize the sort of Hammer horror aspect, which would have been very prevalent in like the Hinchcliffe era. Whereas Christopher Bidmead thought it was against the hard science fiction approach that he was trying to go for as script editor.
Quick question. 3 years prior, would that have been Leela?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would have been interesting to see.
Yeah. So in the story, the peasants give a weird, funny salute to their lords. They cover their eyes, their ears, and their mouth. This is in reference to the 3 wise monkeys, so see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Which, given the context of the story, is actually quite interesting, I think. The Time Lord Hermit, who told the Doctor about the Great Vampire, you say it was Campo Rinpoche. I don't think Campo Rinpoche actually gets mentioned. I think that's an assumption on your part. That's the same guy.
Well, like, no, because he said an old hermit on the South Mountains of Gallifrey, which is what he told Joe in the Time Monster.
Yeah. So you're assuming it's the same person.
Yeah.
Originally,
it's my headcanon.
Originally, that was meant to be an old woman, which is why I bring it up.
Okay.
So it wasn't originally meant to be Campo Rinpoche.
All right, fair enough.
There's a couple of subplots originally in the script involving the townsfolk wandering around at night in the forest like zombies. Rebellious citizens being found with bite marks on their necks and stuff like that. So playing up more of the vampire element, I suppose. So we've talked in previous episodes around how for a lot of the season Tom Baker was actually quite sick. He'd returned from Australia and was quite ill. According to John Nathan Turner, Tom's illness was at its worst during this shoot. And Tom refused to go see a doctor. That sounds so familiar to so many people I know. He claimed John Nathan Turner claimed that it's clear which scenes were shot in the first recording session and which in the second based on how Tom looks. This is the first story where Tom actually had to have his hair curled, to put his hair in rollers, because his hair lost its curl because he was going through such dramatic weight loss from being sick. And apparently his hair would straighten out like every 10 minutes. He did finally seek medical advice, and he was found to have a metabolic disorder that, once diagnosed, seemed to put him back on the road to recovery. But like, given the fact that like this is the 4th story of this season, though it was filmed a bit earlier, that's crazy. And we've commented on it that like in previous stories where like he actually looks so ill. And the fact that he was refusing to go to a doctor is just crazy. Peter Moffat didn't really find Tom to be that cooperative with him, I suppose you'll say. He found Tom to be argumentative and felt that Tom wanted to direct the production himself, which is a feeling we've gotten from a lot of directors as we've been going through. Eventually, Peter took Tom for a drink and told him that while he was open to suggestions from actors, he was the director and Tom was the actor, and he should bear that in mind. And apparently, as we've seen with sort of other instances with Tom sort of acting out, when people are direct with him and sort of whatever, he tends to be a bit more cooperative, and that was the case here as well. In terms of Adric, Terrence really struggled to find a sort of raison d'etre, as you would, for Adric, and ultimately decided to play upon the character's duplicitous tendencies by making the viewers think that he had actually sided with the villain. That was Terrence who did that, because he didn't really know what to do with Adric. However, Jonathan Turney John Nathan Turner and Christopher Bidmead later decided to de-emphasize the more overly negative and sort of malicious aspects of Adric's personality. And so this element of the scripts was watered down a lot. Again, we'll talk about it when we talk about Adric, but he comes across odd.
Yeah.
In this one. Interesting thing about Alcon. So, oftentimes when I'm going through the trivia, they'll often say like about other actors who are considered for the role of certain people. And usually I don't mention it because it would go on for long. However, Alcon, there was 2 actors that you and I both love that were considered for that role. Those actors being Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart.
Ooh. Oh, that would have been interesting.
Yeah. There was a host of other people considered, and you can go on to the TARDIS fandom wiki if you want to look them all up. But I found it funny that like both Ian and Patrick were considered for the same role.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because they did eventually get Ian for a role.
Yeah, that was in the one with the snowman.
The snowman, yeah, called the snowman. And so like I have a group that I call the Shakespearean Trio, which is the 2 of them and Derek Jacobi. And Patrick's the only one so far that hasn't appeared in Doctor Who.
Yeah, and I don't know if he will.
Yeah.
Patrick is really sort of starting to step away from acting stuff since Picard is finished, so
yeah,
we'll see.
Maybe a voice role or something.
Yeah. We've also spoken throughout this season about Tom and Lala and their relationship. At this point, they weren't on speaking terms. After Lala rebuffed Tom's attempts to rekindle their romance a couple of weeks earlier. We talked about that when we talked about the season opener. Peter Moffat recalled asking Tom at one point if he could help Lala Ward down in the engine room pipe scene. And Tom retorted, "Why, is she a bloody cripple?" I'm going to say sadly, maybe fortunately for them, we'll see, they were united in one thing, which was their dislike for Matthew Waterhouse. Interesting, following filming of this story, they rekindled their romance and then went on to announce their engagement. That, like, hearing their relationship described through Doctor Who trivia points, and I know you've read the behind the scenes book, Space Animal for a Cow, which obviously goes into a bit more detail, I'm sure, but I'm like, this is like the worst relationship ever. No offense, I know they're real people, but like, oh my god.
Oh, it's really fucked up. Also, I love the way they used to say the book title really fast so you wouldn't start devolving into giggles. But yeah, no, it actually, because I was looking it up and they were, when did you say the air date for this was again?
December 1980.
Yeah, they actually got married in December of 1980.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how far back their engagement was, because we will talk about it more in our character discussion. But yeah, I've read just the one source, which is the book Space Animal for a Cow, talking of the various backstage impressions of Matthew Waterhouse. So we might have more as that comes along.
Yeah. I was trying to see if the TARDIS fandom wiki stated the recording dates, but they don't. They do like production order, but they don't give production dates.
Cool.
Before we go into our cast, one last call out in regards to Lala Ward and Matthew Waterhouse. They both named this as their favourite story. So it'll be interesting when we get to our scores to see if we agree. Let's go on to our cast. So as Habers, we have Ian Rattray. Not quite sure. This is the only Doctor Who acting credit for Ian. His non-Who credits include Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, Jenny's War, and Wish Me Luck. Ian actually kept his Doctor Who State of Decay script, and so the producers for the DVD consulted him about the script because he actually still had his original script, which is really cool.
That's cool.
Kalmar is played by Arthur Hewlett. This is the first of 2 appearances for Arthur. We'll see his work again in Terror of the Vervoids. His non-Who credits include Calling Bulldog Drummond, Quartermass in the Pit, No Hiding Place, The Newcomers, and Blake 7. Arthur passed away back in 1997. Tarek is played by Thane Bettany, is the only Doctor Who acting credit for Thane. His non-Who credits include The Talisman, Hamlet, and North Sea Hijack. Yes, what you're thinking is correct. Thane was the father of actor Paul Bettany.
That's cool.
Thane passed away in 2015. Veros is played by Stacey Davis. This is the second and final appearance for Stacey. We previously saw him as Private Perkins in The Invasion. His non-Who credits include Z-Cars, No Hiding Place, The O'Needle Line, and London's Burning. Stacey passed away in 2019. Ivo is played by Clinton Grain. This is the first of 2 appearances for Clinton. We'll see him again in The Two Doctors. His non-Who appearances include Goodbye Mr. Chips, Scotch on the Rocks, and Department S. Clinton also passed away in 2019. Alcon went on to be played by Emrys James. This is the only Doctor Who acting credit for Emrys. His non-Who credits include Dragon Slayer, The Rise and Fall of Cesar Barreto, The Scarlet and the Black, and The Diary of Anne Frank. Emrys passed away in 1989. Camilla is played by Rachel Davies, only Doctor Who acting credit for Rachel. Her non-Who credits include Band of Gold, The Last Detective, Midsummer Murders, and The Chase. Zargo is played by William Lindsay, again only Doctor Who acting credit for William. His non-Who credits include Colditz, Angels, Blake 7, and Life Force. William passed away in 1986.
Just before you get into the final person, I actually recently watched The Scarlet and the Black. I watched a bit of it. It's really cool. I didn't know about this. There's a statue of a priest in Killarney near the High Street, and it's a statue of a guy called Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, who was actually a cleric in the Vatican and during World War II. And he was essentially like the Oscar Schindler in Rome at the time. He had this huge network of keeping Jews and Allied soldiers safe in the Vatican while the Gestapo were trying to hunt him down. It's actually really cool. Yeah, in the movie, Gregory Peck plays Hugh O'Flaherty, and Christopher Plummer plays the Gestapo officer trying to find him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So last week we talked about Matthew Waterhouse briefly, who played the role of Adric. Obviously, Adric is in this story as well, and he's going to be in the next one. Spoiler alert. So let's talk a bit more about Matthew. So Matthew was born in Hartford in December of 1961, which means we can imagine that this story aired December 1980. He would have been 18 when he was filming, and he turned 19 when this was airing. He began his career as a clerk in the BBC News Department before securing a role in the television drama To Serve Them All My Days in early 1980. Shortly after that, he auditioned for and won the role of Adric. He was a confirmed Doctor Who fan, and he had had at least one letter printed in Doctor Who Weekly before he took up the role, which reminds me of another confirmed Doctor Who fan who had letters and things published before he got a role in Doctor Who. Matthew was the youngest actor to play a companion, and he actually remains the youngest male actor to have done so to this day. State of Decay was the first serial that Matthew filmed, so State of Decay was actually filmed before Full Circle. Matthew is openly gay and is believed to be the first non-heterosexual actor on Doctor Who to have been open about his sexuality while on the series, which is very interesting. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was open while he was filming.
In 2010, Matthew joined a growing number of Doctor Who actors in publishing an autobiography. In his book, called Blue Box Boy, he writes candidly about his experiences making Doctor Who. In it, he claims that Tom Baker had a horrible attitude, and that he was shocked that someone he admired could be this way. To give the other side of that experience, according to Lalla Ward, Matthew was rude to costume designer Amy Roberts, because she wouldn't let him go to the canteen in his costume, prompting Lalla to have to intervene. When Matthew went to introduce himself to Tom Baker in the pub, apparently he waited for him to come over. 2 hours passed before Matthew finally went over to him, and apparently he was told to piss off. According to Peter Moffat, Matthew had no knowledge of camera technique at all, and he made the fatal mistake of advising Tom on how to say a line. Tom nearly hit him, and Peter had to tell Michael off. This sounds like it was an absolutely terrible experience.
Yeah, because I had heard... So I'd heard a lot of this. So I'd heard about how he went up to Tom and Tom told him to piss off. I didn't know about the attempted, taking a swing at him. And I had heard about giving advice to Tom and this kind of stuff. And the other sources that I read were basically that he kind of let the experience go to his. No, this is one source saying that he had let the experience go to his head a bit. Like, I'm on Doctor Who, I'm this. So there was a bit of cock of the walk about him. But at the same time, one of the other aspects of it is that, as you kind of pointed out, he's an 18-year-old kid landing a role in one of the biggest series on British television at the time. And you can do stupid stuff in that sort of scenario.
Yeah.
It doesn't give someone the right to take a swing at you.
Yeah, and like, playing devil's advocate a bit, I wasn't present for these events. We weren't even born when this happened.
Nope.
But I do wonder if the fact that Tom was ill, Tom and Lala weren't getting on, if the idea of this young kid coming in, a Doctor Who fan, maybe overzealous, very green around the ears, doesn't know how cameras really work, maybe like not hitting his mark that much, that type of thing. I wonder if it was just a culmination of things. Like, I wonder, had Tom not been ill, had him and Lala been in a better place together, would it have been a different experience with Matthew where they would have taken him under their wing or something like that? Now, maybe he still would have been super fucking annoying, but I wonder if it would have been as bad. Like, because in terms of like the not knowing camera technique, I still remember this story that Gates McFadden tells because it's absolutely fucking hilarious. Because Gates was a stage performer for the most part before she got her role in Star Trek. And so it got so bad during season 1 of filming Star Trek Next Generation, they had to put sandbags down to get her to stop on her mark, and she'd often just walk over them. So used to being on stage and being able to sort of free flow around the room. So when they were saying that, like, Matthew didn't have good knowledge of camera technique, I just keep being reminded of that story that Gates tells about how, like, she was so shocking at acting for camera that, like, it drove people absolutely bananas. After leaving Doctor Who, Matthew went on to do some work on stage. He also did a couple of other performances, which I mentioned last week. Big Finish did reach out to him several times, offering Matthew a role, and he turned them down for years, not wanting to do it. It wasn't because, like, he had any resentment against the company or anything like that. He had nothing against Big Finish personally, but he felt he couldn't capture the youthful essence of a 15-year-old Adric at his age. However, later he went on to do some recording of Target audiobooks. And so once he had a couple of those under his belt and he felt a bit more comfortable, he, was like, okay, maybe I can play Adric in a sort of audio drama style. And so he's now gone and done a number of titles with Big Finish as Adric. And thus endeth the trivia.
Awesome. Thank you, as always, for the very interesting trivia insights. So now we're going to move on to the character discussion. So we've got a bit to get through this week. As always, we have the Doctor. Then we have the companions of Romana. A bit more discussion about K9, because he's a bit more prevalent in this story. We have Adric again, who is now a companion. We have a group of prominent characters. I've put down Kalmar, Tarek, Veros, and Ivo. Habris is, again, straddling the fence the same way as Dexter was last week, for me anyway. And then we have the unholy trio of Zargo, Camillo, and Alcon as villains. What are your thoughts on Habris, just before we actually discuss?
I put him in prominent character, but he's like the prominent character just before we go into villains, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Same as Dexter's. Well, Dexter was originally going to be that, but then we had a very interesting discussion about the Deciders.
Yeah, where I didn't see Dexter the same way you did,
yeah. Cool. So, you did the socials, so lead us off about the Doctor.
Okay, so first of all, I do want to say that, yes, what I said in trivia is true. It is very clear that Tom is not well. Just looking at him, it's very clear. Separate from that, though, this is one of those stories where, for me, the Doctor knows everything, and this is that he reacts to everything. Just like, oh, it's the this, and it's the that, and oh, it's the... But we don't, like, I know we get, like, the Dracula myth, but we don't get the cool reveal of him knowing what the wilting is, whatever the fuck it's called.
The wasting.
The wasting is, like, he keeps being like, the wasting. As if he knows what it is.
Yeah.
But we never get him, like, explain to the villagers how he knows what it is. Or whatever. So it seems to be a story of, like, the Doctor knows everything. But, like, we don't get, in my opinion, we don't get the best sort of explanation of that, or the best follow-through on that, compared to what we've seen in previous stories, where the Doctor knows something from a previous adventure, and it's presented in a good way. Like, his reveal of how he knew it was in a good way. We never know, other than, like, in the Dracula myth he talks about, is the wasting mentioned there? Is that how he knew what it was?
Like, I still don't know what the wasting is.
Yeah, like, I imagine the wasting is meant to be like what the name the villagers give to people who have their blood sucked. But because the whole zombie nocturnal element and finding bodies that have bat bites on them bit was removed from the script, the wasting on its own makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, if the wasting is a thing of where people, they find bodies with their blood drained, and the Lords are meant to protect them from it, the Lords are doing a fairly shit job.
Well, the Lords say they protect them from it.
Yeah.
Do you know?
But no, but like, you...
Yeah, so, but like, for me, for the Doctor being like, oh, the wasting, as if he knows what the fuck it is. I'm like, whatever. The backstory of the Dracula myth, the Doctor saying like, oh, this old hermit I was friends with, aka Camper Russia, told me this story. It was interesting in a way. Do you know, we will have future Doctors who, obviously we had it with Doc John, we will have future Doctors sort of retelling stories from their youth and stuff like that. So it was interesting, but I think it's because it's Dracula. It doesn't really come across like something the Doctor would actually believe or would even remember. Do you know? Like, and maybe it's because of the chase and the Doctor's reaction to Dracula in the chase.
Very possibly.
But when he was describing the myth, I'm like, and you didn't mention this in that episode? No? So that for me was a little bit wishy-washy. The whole thing with him like going back to the TARDIS and finding out like how to kill the final whatever, that just went on for fucking ages. Like, oh, it's not really in the memory banks, it's a physical copy, and he has to print out this big long thing every time. And I was like, oh my god, whatever. And then when he gets to actually his attack, where he's got to go to 3 things, it's like, he knows his friends are in trouble, and he's like, cool, I'm going to climb up, I'm going to do this, and this, and this. Ho hum, this one doesn't work. I will try the next. Like, dude, where's your urgency? Like, on the last one we got a little bit of urgency, but like, for the first 2, it's like, oh, didn't work. Time to try the next one. I'm like, dude, you should be flying up that ladder, banging buttons and fucking off. Like, I know you're Tom Baker, and so you therefore you don't have the same reactions as most people, but like, there's a fucking line. Do you spend so long looking up the thing in the computer, and then having your lend me your ears moment, like, do you know, it's like a little bit of urgency is fine. What I did like though is I did actually quite like the lend me your ears scene, because I'm like, hello men in tights, how you doing? I know you referred to what it's actually from, but the way it was played out here is very men in tights.
Are you with me? Yay or nay? Which one wins yes?
Yay. But yeah, that was really about it. Like, he was there. He did stuff. But I just feel, and I don't know whether it was because, like I said, maybe it was because Tom was ill, but it just seemed just sort of, meh. He's there. He did stuff. And that's it. How about you?
So yeah, I do agree with some of what you're saying. All right, like the scene with the now, I love a good lore dump. I do, because I love lore, but that I did think that did go on a slight bit too long. Although we did kind of get the flip side of it, whereas K9 was like, "Nope, it's not here. I told you, it's not here." Did you ever think of checking your big massive fuck off library? So it gave us the benefit of K9 stuff, but for the Doctor, yeah, it just did seem to go on a small bit too long. And even like with the whole, I think there was a lot of repetition about how do I do this, in just in different locations. Stuff that I did like him telling, telling the story about, the old meeting with the old hermit. Now, so far, I don't think anyone has done a story, like a retelling of a story, as good as John has done from the one he did in the Time Monster, because that one was just fucking beautiful. But it was nice to see him kind of go back to that side of things again. Two things actually about that cell sequence. One, Tom is really good at selling a physical altercation with someone, because he uses his teeth quite a bit. When he knocked that guy out, it was like the whole you like the pain of like him having to fucking knock a guy out. Also, it did look like he actually, I know that he tucked his head down to take the impact of the door.
No, he actually got hit by the door. No, he actually got hit by the door.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I was like going,
the days like delay. He actually got hit by the door.
Yeah, Jesus, because like I something like myself and my friends, we used to do like amateur movies before, and we were filming a fight sequence, and I had to throw myself back. I threw myself back, and I hit a door, and it was like the sound wasn't added in. That was me. And then for the next couple of hours, the lads were like, "You can't fall asleep. You can't fall asleep. You can't fall asleep." But I did like the whole MacGyvering of a solution with the scout ship. Into like, this is all right. I'll turn this exploration vehicle into a big giant flying stake. His interactions with the majority of the characters were interesting. Like, no, they weren't fully really fleshed out, unfortunately, because I think there's an issue with pacing in this story.
Yeah.
But like, I liked his interactions with Orkhan. I liked his stuff with Tarek and with his limited stuff with Ivo. One thing I would have loved to have seen, and I think we could have got at least 10 minutes of it if they had tightened it up a bit, is actually an interaction with the Vampire King.
Yeah.
Because like, we love it when the Doctor takes on the big bad evil guy. So it would have been very interesting to see.
Or even a mental battle would have been good.
Yeah, like, or a mental conversation, because it's like, okay, Orkhan has some sort of psychic ability, so that's what the Great One is communicating. We know that the Doctor also has psychic abilities, so why couldn't the Great One, have a dig at him? So it's still, I think, an ongoing trend from the last story of like, all right, we're kind of getting a flair for Tom when he was in the Hinchcliffe era. And one thing I will say is that, like, and you kind of pointed it out a couple of weeks ago when I was kind of talking about John Nathan Turner's mission plan and Christopher Bymead's mission plan to make Who serious, but then the first two stories that they turned out weren't overly serious. The tone of this one and of Full Circle, I fully understand what they're going for now. And like, yeah, absolutely, I was kind of jumping the gun, because as you said at the time, less isn't, none. What do you say?
Less isn't none.
None. Yeah, less isn't none. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so no, like, I think they've actually they've set a really good tone with the Doctor and with the story for these last two stories. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me for the Doctor.
Very good. Very good.
So we have Romana, K9, and Adric in the companion bracket. How do you want to do it?
Let's do the bestest boy first.
Okay, cool.
Did I miss something? And I'll mention it again when we talk about Ivo. Why the fuck did Ivo not like K9?
Oh, because he's a dog.
Was that the only reason?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he's a robot dog.
Okay, so one interesting thing about K9 in this story, we saw him leave the TARDIS.
Mm-hmm.
We have never seen it before. Usually they cut away and suddenly he's gone down the little step. But this time we actually saw him roll down the step. Which begs the question, how does he get back in?
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, didn't we see him leave in Horns of Naiman? But no, they cut.
No, they cut. They cut, or else they only show like his head. They don't show his wheels. And whereas this time we actually got to see his wheels come off. For me, I think K9 in this story was used about as well as he could be.
Mm-hmm.
I think the scene between him and Adric was interesting. I'll talk about it more when I talk about Adric, but it was an interesting scene to see. It really gave flashbacks to what was the one with your man who looked like David Bowie? I have forgotten the name of the story.
A story with someone that looks like Bowie.
Yeah, the guy in the white costume and the invisible ship.
Oh, Shada.
Yeah, that one. That one that's like quite famous that I've just forgotten the fucking name of. It did, like, Adric's logic with K9 and K9's response did kind of remind me of the Doctor sort of playing the computer.
And ship, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I was reminded of that. The one thing I would have liked to have seen from K9 in this story is, and it's sort of like jumping ahead to like Sarah Jane Adventures and stuff. I would have liked to have seen K9 sort of try to debunk the whole vampire thing.
Mm-hmm.
And be like, yes, there are vampires in every culture, but there is no such thing as a vampire. Like, you know, him sort of be like, you know, there's nothing there. Do you know, like, I would have liked to have seen the Doctor trying to convince K9 it was a thing. Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And being like, yo, K9, like, search your memory banks for all your information on this. Like, well, I don't have any. Why would I have information on that? It's a story. The other thing I found weird was before the Doctor and Romana set out, I almost feel like maybe John Leeson was sick or something, because they go outside, they have a look, they come back in, then the Doctor's leaving, and he crouches down to K9 and is like, I know you want to come, but someone has to mind. And he's having a conversation and K9 isn't talking back. And I'm like, did John have to go to the toilet? Like, why doesn't K9 say anything?
Well, I think it's
in that interaction.
Yeah, because like the operator just has him lower his head and like turn in his ears. So maybe just Terrence just didn't write dialogue for that section.
Maybe, but it was a bit weird. But yeah, so overall though, like, I mean, K9 is bestest boy. He's the best one to bring into battle. I love that, like, at the end when he gave the signal, someone, I'm assuming, had put him on the throne.
Yeah, that was good.
Which I thought was really good. But yeah, like I said, there's a couple of weird things, and like I would have liked to have seen K9 being a being of logic and fact, and the Doctor having to convince K9 that this is a real thing. Like when the Doctor can't find the listing in the memory banks, K9's like, oh, did you think of checking the library? But I would have liked, I almost would have preferred it if K9 was like, well, if it's not in the memory banks, then it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? And maybe that way, like, they go through, it's like, well, if it's not in the memory banks, where would it be? And then the Doctor's like, oh, I'll have a physical copy in the library. And whatever. Well, I don't know. I guess I just sort of wanted a bit more out of that.
No, you actually raise a really good point, and again, it's kind of it highlights an issue with the scripting of this story because okay, my first point is I really enjoyed K9 in the story because I liked how he was the one that was correcting the Doctor on stuff, like as I said, check your library, you know. Also, the computations for e-space being a much narrower framework than real space. Like, so again, he was the one that seemed to be doing a lot more educating than the Doctor was in this story, I thought. But no, and also leading the daring commando raid was fantastic, and being up on top of the throne was excellent. But no, you raised a good point about Dracula earlier on and Kena not having any lore. And so we're led to believe that this race of vampires are meant to be the source for vampire lore throughout the universe. But the thing then is that it's the Time Lords that fought the war with the vampires. And the Time Lords then became their pacifist, non-intrusive policies then apparently were born from this war. So it raises the question, how did vampire lore get to the rest of the universe?
Yeah. It's a...
Because if the king vampire gets to into e-space, then nothing, and we're like, again, e-space seems to draw stuff in as opposed to letting anything out. So again, how does the lore disseminate throughout the universe?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about that a bit more when I get to the overall, but that was the same type of thing that was bothering me.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. Because like this war apparently happened in the days of Rassilon's youth, and Rassilon is considered to be, like, for a lot of civilizations aren't even a thing at the time of Rassilon's youth.
Yeah.
Cool. Who do you want to do next?
We'll do Romana.
Cool.
So Romana was she was in the story. I distinctly remember seeing her. Yeah, that was Romana.
Okay.
No, but seriously though, like, I was really hoping after last week that we'd see a really strong bond developing between Romana and Adric, because they seemed to get along last week, and I was really looking forward to seeing that develop more. So like once they were together, like once she had, tried to rescue him, whatever, once they were together, I was really looking forward to them teaming up, them bouncing ideas off of each other and whatever. And we didn't get that. And that's mostly because of the writing choice they made for Adric. But like, maybe I'm downplaying the fact that she did try to lead the rescue to save Adric and whatever. But other than that, like, she was there. She mentions the MacGuffin of there's information in the TARDIS about how to defeat vampires, when the Doctor had to explain to her what the fuck a vampire was. It's like, well, if she knew what was in the Book of Rassilon, it...
Well, like, I don't think I think, and it might be just the wording of the dialogue, because the way that I took it was that the war is it's only really it's a fairy tale for a lot of, we'll say, the older generation of Time Lords, because like, we're led to, we know that the Doctor is much older than Romana, so this is the fairy tale, and from what we've seen from Romana thus far, she's not really a fairy tale type person. But when the Doctor mentions the fact that it was in the days of talk about like the fact that it was Rassilon leading the war, that she goes like, when was it? Oh, because the information that we're looking for might be in this book called The Record of Rassilon. So
yeah, but I think similar to K9 though, I wouldn't expect her to go to that. I'd expect her to be like, oh, clearly that's nonsense. Do you know? I did episode 1 and episode 2. She's there.
Yeah.
She has her attempted rescue of Adric. We'll give her credit for that. And then she's a sacrifice.
Question for you, right?
Yeah.
Because Romana has the Time Lord Romana has been on multiple adventures with the Doctors now.
Mm.
So would the concept of a vampire-like creature not entirely be alien to her because of the Stones of Blood?
Maybe. I think it's because I see the Romanas as two different people at this point.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And that's the thing where it's like, because it goes back to our discussion from Destiny of the Daleks.
Mm.
Like, is it meant to be the same regeneration, just with a chosen face, or is it a brand new person?
Yeah. Like, the thing with Romana in this one, right, I'll be honest, is that, like, I want her to be doing more. You know?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
For so much, she's just there. Like, there was a scene, and I was like, oh my god, like, I'm waiting for the explosion, because I really wanted a strong bond between Romana and Adric.
Mm-hmm.
When Adric is joining forces with the bad guys, and Romana is trying to convince him, and he's like, one of my family already died for you, Time Lord. I'm not going to let another one die for you.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my god. Can't believe he just said that.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, bear in mind, at the time, the audience is meant to think that Adric really believes this, whatever.
Yeah.
But we never get her being like, you know, there's no follow-up to it. There's no emotional payoff. Like, again, you imagine him throwing that back in Romana 1's face.
Yeah. There's no acknowledgement of Varsha's death.
Yeah. Like, even later on, like, at the end, like, when he's like, oh, I was only playing along, like, to whatever, you know, you'd kind of want a moment of her being like, yeah, I know. I knew that at the time, too. About your brother, though, I am sorry. There was no connection, which was bothering me.
The nearest thing to, like, some sort of relationship between the two of them that we do get is at the end, where she, as I said, jokingly uses his terminology back against him. Like, well, you didn't quite rescue me, did you?
Yeah.
And there's just sort of the in-joke. But, like, I think... You see, this is sometimes, like we talked about it before, this is sometimes the issue with Doctor Who in the classic era. When they try and do these serialized stories or back-to-back stories, but they have different writers, and at times, well, writers that have never done stuff for Who before. So like last week,
the episodes may be filmed out of order.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's the combination. It's a horrible trifecta because last week it was, I cannot remember his name, but that young fella, that was his first contribution ever. Meanwhile, we have Terence, who was an old hand with a certain mentality, shall we say. So, like, when you're doing these serialized stories, it's really, really tough because it looks like there's this complete disconnect as to what everyone understands the character to be.
Yeah.
Which is amazing because if you think about it, like when we go back to the early days, where each story kind of led into, especially for like the first season, each story, or even the first two seasons, each story led into the next one. But there never seemed to be this huge disconnect between the characters. Well, or at least that got us saying that, Jesus, that's very out of fucking character for them.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, if you look at Terence's writing, like, he himself, so not when he was script editor, but when he was writing, the war games, the female characters in the war games, I think, were very strong.
Yeah.
Thinking back on it. Robot, we had this weird mismatch of Miss Winters and then Sarah Jane, where we have the women's lib line and stuff like that. But at the end, it's Sarah Jane and King Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So not the strongest writing. In Brain of Morbius, we had that sort of hammer horror, which he wrote with Bob Holmes. But also, like, Sarah Jane's blinded and she's lost and, like, she doesn't get to do as much.
Mm-hmm.
But then we've got horror of Frank Mark. And so we can sort of see through them, like, the development of Terrence writing female characters. And then we get to this one, and it's like he was like, he wrote the story 3 years prior. It's like he doesn't know who Romana is. So he gave her the line about, it would be in the TARDIS memory banks or whatever. But then he also had her being, like, as opposed to her being also turned into a vampire, Time-Lord vampire, that'd be fucking scary as hell. It's like, oh no, she's going to be the sacrifice and she's going to wear the white dress and whatever. And I'm like, Terrence, come on, like, change
Actually, you raised a good point there, and I know that we're kind of going into the weeds on this kind of stuff as well, like, but we talked about, you mentioned the war games and how Zoe and Lady, cannot remember the name of the character, but I think it might have been Lady Jane. I think it might have been Lady Jane. They were very strong. Bear in mind that Terrence co-wrote that with Malcolm Hulk.
Yes.
And Malcolm did, like, going through his credits, we had the Faceless ones, which was, granted, no, Polly wasn't hugely in it, but your one, Samantha, was a very strong character that we liked. Then he also did Doctor Who and the Silurians, which has Liz being great in it. He co-wrote Ambassadors of Death with Terrence, which is kind of telling with the way that Liz is treated in that. And then he did Colony in Space, The Sea Devils, Frontier in Space, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs. All of, like, that's Malcolm. All of which have really strong representation for their female characters. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know, like, what were your other thoughts on Leela? What were your other thoughts on Romana?
The one thing is that I think it maybe might be more in relation to Tom and Lala, because it does seem like that their mutual disdain for Matthew has united them, because the rapport between the Doctor and Romana is actually quite good here. There's some really, really good relationships between the two of them. And initially it was me wondering, was it like their impending marriage that was like a reason behind it? But no, it's just they hated the new guy. But no, I agree that there was a bit more deferring to the Doctor in this. And so, yeah, it is kind of a shame.
Yeah.
So we have Adric.
Oh, Adric. My initial reaction is poor Matthew. Because let's say one thing about how Terrence writes women. He does not know how to write children. In my opinion, the writing for Adric in the story was piss poor.
Okay.
I don't know if Matthew's acting was much better, but he wasn't really given a whole lot to work with. Not necessarily in the scenes he was doing, as in, like, the story of Adric was quite good. I actually quite liked the story of Adric in the story. But the actual dialogue he was given was shocking. Like, it was just really poor. Again, I made the correlation last week, but I'm seeing, like, season 1 TNG Wesley.
Yeah.
Do you know, there's just this really poor dialogue. There's really not much you can do with it. And given Matthew's greenness at the time, like, again, like, the way his lines are delivered comes across very weird.
It comes across as kind of cheesy.
Yeah. And, like, the thing for me was that, like, at the beginning, we see him outwitting K9. Okay, and I can understand it's a bit weird to act with a robot dog, right? But we see him outwitting K9. I'm like, ooh, interesting. We've seen the Doctor do this before. This is interesting. Then later, we have him in the village. And, yeah, he's sort of being a little bit blasé. Do you have any XYZ or whatever? But he earns his keep. He doesn't sit around expecting them to wait on him. He doesn't, like, when he goes up, he takes one ladle of stew or soup or whatever it is, and that's it. Like, I was kind of half fearful that they would have him be, like, a complete fucking prick and, fill up his bowl with several scoopfuls and take 2 things of bread and, like, not being, but he seemed very aware of the fact that these people didn't have a lot and they were giving him a bit. And so he took it. And then the following morning, we see that he's helping. He's delivering bowls of food. He's trying to get to know people. I'm like, okay, I'm liking this. I'm liking what's going. The writing, not great. And I said some of the line reads, not great. But again, what they're doing with Adric, I'm really liking it. But then we have the whole thing of him being taken and his double cross of saying that he was going, with the Doctor and Romana, he's not going to get anywhere. He might not break out of E-space, but like they're giving him like unlimited power and whatever. And like I said, I don't know if it was the dialogue, I don't know if it was the direction, I don't know if it was Matthew. I think it was a combination of all 3. It just didn't work. Instead of him coming across as intelligent, sneaky, aware of what's going on around him, and whatever, he comes across as selfish, two-faced, because when he says to Romana later, oh, I was only pretending, I was really going to rescue, you don't believe him.
Yeah.
You don't believe him, because the way the scenes are played, we said it last week that, like, when you have very intelligent young characters, when they're written in weak moments, they come across as petulant and they come across as petty. And that's the way this was written and played. And I'm like, I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. Again, like we made the example last week of Wesley. I'll forgive Wesley all the live long day for the vast majority of the shit that comes out of his mouth. But it's like, you're making it difficult for me to do that. Like Wesley's like, I'm with Starfleet and we don't lie. Terrible dialogue. I don't know what Will was meant to do with the line, but you get the conviction of Wesley through it, even if it's cheesy as hell.
Yeah.
Here, it's just not selling it. Do you know? How about you?
So I will admit, right, that he legitimately had me with the turn to the dark side of thing. But that's because the way Terrence wrote it, it latched onto the negative aspects of the character that we were discussing last week.
Yeah.
And so I was like going, fuck it. Like I legitimately believed in that moment that he was going to do something fucking stupid, like actually sign up with them. But the dialogue isn't great. Like he was like, he said like, "Oh, it looks like the goodies don't win this time." I'm like for fuck's sake,
goodies. Who the fuck says that?
That's a really bad line. Also, I know that Romana's title would be Time Lady, but the way he says it, it's like, "Sorry, Time Lady." It's like that just sounds stupid. The way that it was delivered, it does sound stupid.
Yeah.
And like I think, well, no, to be fair, that might be just an intrinsic thing because we've never heard another character address Romana as Time Lady. Yeah. It's always like Time Lords. So like, I don't know if we'll ever hear that line delivered in the rest of the show. So I can't really compare it to anything. But just the way Adric said it, it did come across as kind of whatever. I will say though that the line about enough of my family have died for Time Lords already, I did quite like that line. No, maybe he could have sold it a bit sadder, but I think he delivered it okay. But there's stuff about, as you said, the concept of Adric in this story is quite good. Like you talk about him earning his keep while in the thing. Also, there's an element of compassion that he has towards Ivo's wife.
Yeah.
Because, like, clearly, we know that she's using Adric as a substitute for her son while he's gone. I think Adric probably senses that as well, but he doesn't pull away from it. Now, he doesn't realistically lean into it, but he's there, he's comforting and supportive, and I think he has a really good rapport with her. So I did like that. I liked. No, this was the way that I interpreted it. Is that his conversation with Romana while they were chained up about vampires, while to him sounding dismissive, was coming as part of his plan, because you can see that at the end of episode 3, Tarek throws his knife into Zargo, and it hits. Sorry, Adric throws the knife and it hits the shoulder, and nothing there. But Adric knows that from the conversation with Romana that a shot to the heart will do it. And his plan was, I think it was quite good, was while Alcon is distracted with the ceremony, run up and stab him in the heart. But he just didn't account for the fact that Alcon is a lot more powerful than he first suspected. So I'm not going to fault him for that idea. Because at least it's him actually thinking. But yeah,
I agree with you, but my issue is just the way it was portrayed didn't sell what he was doing. You know?
Yeah, because I do agree with the whole thing. I have a plan. It's like it's coming across as kind of fake. Yeah. So one of those things where on paper good, in visual not so good.
Yeah.
So, moving on. We have the prominent characters. So we have Kalmar, Tarek, Varys, Ivo, and we'll put Habris last, I think, because he does seem like the natural transition character into villains. So what way do you want to do it?
Let's do Varys, Tarek, Ivo, Kalmar, Habris. Because I don't have a lot to say on Varys. I thought he was very one note. I want weapons and to fight, and that was pretty much it.
I have one line that might give you a giggle.
Oh, yeah.
The boy in the grey flannel suit has been bouncing back and forth like a tennis ball. That is a reference to juror number 12 from 12 Angry Men, who does change his opinion with what he feels is the strongest voice in the room. Not necessarily the strongest argument, but the strongest voice.
Yeah, like, for me, Varys was, he was there to be the, I want weapons, I want to fight, I want weapons, I want to fight. That was kind of his job.
but then as like the comparison to Juror 12 is that like he does that, but then Kalmar is saying like, we need to wait to prepare, and he's like, you're right. Like we should wait.
But at his core, I want weapons and I want to fight.
Yeah. But he just flits back and forth, like, and that's all it is. It's like he's the representative of indecision. So you said Tarek next?
Yeah, Tarek I liked, because I like what Tarek represented. So as opposed to Varys, who for the most part was, I'm rebelling, let me rebel. Tarek is intelligent. He is brave. He was a guard. He guarded the lords. So he knows more about what goes on behind those walls than anybody else. But I like what he represents, because when you're selected for one of two things. Either you're made a guard or you're made dinner. Those are your two options, right? He was made a guard, which puts him in a position of privilege. It gives him more safety, one would imagine. Particularly because it doesn't really seem like... I mean, they say that there's rebels, but like we don't really hear much about people fighting back.
Yeah. So
he was in a good position. And he still rebelled. And I like that. I like that we see that character, because we'll talk about Habris in a bit. But I like that with Tarek, we have someone who shows that the rebels come from all quarters. It's not just the peasants rising up. It's the like guards, if you think about it in classes, like guards are like a higher class.
Mm-hmm.
And he still rebelled. And he
Yeah.
fought for everybody, not just for himself, not just for the other guards. He was fighting for everybody. And I really liked that.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing, and I'll talk about it more when we talk about Kalmar, I think Tarek was the leader the rebels needed.
Mm.
And it sucks that he's not the leader they got.
Yeah. No,
How
I
about you?
agree. I know, I completely agree. Like, he was one of the most interesting characters in the whole story, I thought. Because at first, it appears he only wants to use the Doctor and Romana's help just so they can deal with the Lords.
Mm.
You know? But as the story goes on, like, he legitimately wants to save them.
Yeah.
Like, it's not... Like, while I think he does frame it as, like, you know, I'll get them in and bring them out with the knowledge, it's like, well, he could have just as easily broken in and got the knowledge and, you know, come out again. He actually wants to save them. And I think this is evidenced by the fact that he doesn't show any hesitation towards helping Romana go find Adric.
Mm.
There's never this thing of like, oh, we need to leave now or anything like that. It's he actually, and he risks his life for them, and he ends up costing his life, and he dies in quite a traumatic way because Camilla essentially breaks his arm, and then Zargo throws him with enough force into a wall to crack his skull.
Right, he throws him onto a table.
Oh yeah.
And it's almost like, you know, he either cracked his skull or broke his spine or something. But there's the implication that he was thrown with such force that he just died straight away.
Yeah. So, like, again, sorry, I remember like the character from Horror Fang Rock, Higgins. He's very much like Higgins, that really good supporting character that we liked, that unfortunately is the fodder, the emotional fodder for the story.
Yeah.
So then is Kalmar.
So I think Kalmar is an interesting character. I love that he is focused on learning things that he couldn't possibly understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the knowledge is there. And so he wants to find it. He wants to understand it. However, what I'm not a fan of is his assumption that once the revolution is successful that he'll be the one in charge. I'm like, okay, where did that come from? Was there an election we didn't know about? Particularly because he seems more focused on learning than actually rebelling.
Yeah.
Like, I love that he wants to learn. But that should be his focus. Like, he should be lead scientist, not leader. Tarek should be leader. Kalmar, you know, is a researcher, he's a scientist. I don't see him being an effective leader for anybody because I see him being sat in that cave just playing with that computer all day. Do you know? So I think he's an interesting character because it's interesting to see, particularly like an older character, trying to attain knowledge, trying to learn how this system works. I think that's great. I just think he's a poor leader. He's not a strong leader. He's not an effective leader. He doesn't really, I mean, like you said, he has a little bit of sway over Varys, but not really. I think it's mostly Tarek that keeps Varys in line for the most part. Do you know? And Ivo obviously is like not listening to you anymore. Like, they're getting sick of him not doing anything. And even when the Doctor comes up with a plan, he has to actually see the beast before he agrees to it. Yeah. Because he's like, oh, we need to learn more. I was like, okay, but there's 3 of them, and there's fucking how many of you? Do you know what I mean? So, like I said, I think he's interesting, but I think he's a poor leader, and I don't think he should have been left in charge afterwards. I don't know who else they could have picked at that point, but I feel for them that he is the one left in charge, because what I see happening with him is that because he spends so much time trying to learn more, that surprisingly they just remain stagnant because it's constantly about what we can learn more, not about improving things for everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I've actually been kind of going back just out of idle curiosity, and I've been watching some scenes from the Hartnell era and listening to our discussions on them. And Kalmar reminds me of two things. One is a character from Dalek Invasion of Earth, Dortmund, who was the intellectual leader of the resistance, and how we talked about that because he was the most educated person there, he felt that he was always in the right because he was the smartest. And another comparison that Kalmar makes in the Heartland era to me is in the Daleks, when Barbara essentially goes to Ian and the Doctor, just the two of you are just fucking talking back and forth. Would one of you make a decision? Kalmar feels like the embodiment of that back and forth. Because, as you said, I completely understand the whole thing of we need to regain the knowledge that was lost. But in a kind of a gaming type sense, if you're playing like a strategic battle, you have to go on the offensive at some point. Because if you're constantly playing on the defense, you're going to miss your window. And you're not going to win that fight because you're just going to have to retreat and retreat and retreat as all of your resources are worn down. So I completely agree that Kalmar is not an effective leader. And I know the Doctor has like restarted some of their machinery. With Kalmar's leadership, I don't see them ever getting out of E-space.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you used the example there in terms of like a gaming perspective, but like in my mind, Kalmar isn't doing offense. He's also not doing defense. He's doing a weird sort of solo camp on the edge of the map.
Yeah.
Away from everybody else. He's not attacking or defending. You know, the guards came 2 days in a row for a selection. Where was Kalmar and his men? They weren't there. Like, so, like, the pursuit of knowledge is great. If that's what he wants to do, fantastic. You know, more power to him, but someone else should lead if that's the case.
Also, it does raise a question, like, Kalmar is significantly older than the rest of the resistance group. So, like, how long ago did this resistance group start? Like, how long have they been, we need more evidence, we need more proof, we need more education? How long have they been hearing this line?
Yeah. And how did they get him to go in with him, and how did he get them to go in with him in the first place?
Yeah.
Do you know, like, did he find the computer systems first and figure it out, and that brought people to him? Or did he join them and then they found the computer together, and because of his intelligence and be able to figure it out, they pivoted from whoever led them before to him? Like, it there's a lack of background that would have made it more interesting.
Do you know something? Kalmar would make a great decider.
He would. He'd fit in with the bad ones at the same time.
Yeah.
See, what you need is that you need Logan and Kalmar. Logan is decisive. You know, he can make decisions, and Kalmar can do research. Or you need Tarek being leader and Kalmar being head scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ivo.
I feel bad for Ivo for the most part, because of his position in the village. He's the one who puts forward the shortlist for selection. So he has to pick people knowing that some of them will die or never be seen again, while some of them will become guards. And for the ones who become guards, that's great, you know, it's an escalation in status and whatever. But he has to make that selection every time, and then once the guards pick who they want, he stays behind. And, you know, obviously his own son was selected, and we see that was very upsetting for him and his wife. But can you imagine they all live in close proximity. They all eat in the central feasting hall. Imagine the following day seeing a man and his wife knowing that you picked their son to be on the short list, and then their son was taken away, or their daughter was taken away, or their mother, or their brother, whatever. Having to live with that must be very draining. I think the fact that he's part of the resistance, knowing that that's what he has to do every day, makes sense. Again, I do wonder, like, have the resistance ever tried to actually fucking help him with what he has to do? So I said I felt bad for him for the most part. But then he came up with like this 2 against K9. I'm like, fuck off. What the fuck did he ever do?
I was wondering what the least part was that you didn't like him for.
Fuck off. Best boy did nothing, and you're treating him like crap. Fuck you. How about you?
So, like some other stuff in the story, there's an element of the writing here that might affect my thoughts on Ivo, which is, how did he find out about his son? Because up until the Doctor and Romana discovered the bodies in the caverns beneath the castle, all we know is that those selected never return. And we've never had any sort of an inkling that the villagers believe the lords to be, like cannibals or blood drinkers or anything like that. So he comes in and he says, Carl is dead. They bled him dry. So, how do you know that? Did you find the body? In which case, did you find the rest of? Did you find more bodies? Did you see just this huge, extra burial pit full of older bodies? Is that how you found out, or are you making an assumption based on rumors? Because if you're making an assumption based on rumors, only acting upon it when your son is the person that has died, after you have knowingly selected however many people to do it, I'm less sympathetic towards you. But if you found a burial pit and you saw your son's body in it, then the fact that all of your efforts have proven to be in vain is fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah. Like, the other thing that he does, and I'll talk about more in a second when we talk about Habers, is he kills Habers.
Yeah.
Because of what happened to his son.
This
is after the whole thing with the vampires thing has been explained to him.
Yeah.
I'm like, you really blame him? This guy that you kind of called friend, you think he deliberately picked your son to not be a guard and instead to be dinner? You think he did that to you on purpose? It's like, what? And again, like, you feel for him, but it's like, I think his reaction to Habers is a bit over the top. Like, attacking him, fine, but like, it wasn't Habers' fault.
But because Haber says before Ivo charges him that I tried to help him.
Yeah.
And again, we're just left to we're left with the question: is this just a bluff of a man that is going to be killed? Or did he legitimately try to do it? Because we don't see any. After Carl is taken, we never see him again. So we never see any of the whole, step this way, my child, and the cloak fucking descends over them or anything like that. So the more we talk about it, the more that there's an awful lot of fucking grey in this story. And you're like, Christopher and John, in order to balance out Peter's desire for what to direct plus their own desire for what they wanted the script to be. I'd be interested to see the original draft of the story. I would. Because how much actual explanatory dialogue or exposition was removed.
Yeah.
But I suppose that's a really good segue into Habers.
Yeah, so when we were talking about whether we should include Habers, I said that Habers, for me, was the most interesting character in the story. And he is. Because Habers, to me, represents who Tarek once was. So, like I said, as a guard, Habers has power over the other villagers. He also seems to be the head guard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's brought into council with the big three. But we also hear about how he eats with the villagers. He's friendly with them. Like, him and Ivo are kind of friends. Ivo even says, like, you eat with us and whatever. So, clearly, he's not a total asshole. On the same side, or on the other side, he shows great reverence for the lords and those he perceives as lords. Like, immediately, like, once he looks at the Doctor and Romana and he's like, they must be lords. And his deference to them is not done in a kiss-ass way. It's done out of genuine respect. Do you know? But from my perspective, we can tell as the story's progressing, Habers' loyalty to the lords isn't blind. You know, whether it's because of what happened to Ivo's son or whatever, but like when Alcon says like, you're guards, that's what you're there for. You're there to die. That's your job. But you can tell even before that, Habers was sort of wary of what they were asking him to do. Like when Alcon was like, go for a selecting, and he's like, what do you mean? We just had one. You know, he's not like a sheriff of Nottingham. Do you know what I mean? Who gets great joy out of it. He clearly doesn't. And like I said, like, you sort of imagine that like he is who Tarek once was. A guard who became disillusioned. And that for me makes him the most interesting, because you tie him with Tarek and you see that evolution of a character from an amazing position of power to someone rebelling. Like I said, why I feel bad for Habers is that because we don't get the scene based off what we've seen of his character. I believe my headcanon is that he did try and save Ivo's son. Like, we see the selection of people that Ivo's putting forward, and we heard mention of like they're looking for people with certain attributes. I can imagine Habers walking down the line being like, well, none of these people is going to be a guard. You know, the villagers don't have strong enough stock of people left. I have to bring them someone who will fit the role, because again, he does believe genuinely about a lot of this stuff. And so I imagine he sees Ivo's son off to the side and is like, you know, Ivo's offering up his wife in this situation. His wife would never be selected for a guard. She'd go into the other option. But his son is young and his son is strong. He could be a guard with me. And so I think he did try to defend Ivo's son. I think he picked Ivo's son specifically to be a guard, not to be a sacrifice. And that's why he sent Ivo's wife back, because if she was brought up, she would have been sacrificed, and he didn't want that. So don't give me your wife. I'll take your son. He'll be a guard, and he'll be with me. Do you know? I don't know. Maybe I read like far too into it, but that's the read I got of it.
All right, I don't know if I agree with you on this one, because so. Sorry, brain. Okay, as far as we're led to believe, the lords never set foot outside the castle. all the selecting where Adric is brought in. That's the first time a lord has ever been there to oversee the selection process.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, how would they know what the available stock of people is like within the village? Like, would they know that Carl existed?
Well, Orcon is telepathic.
True, but like this, no, Alcon is telepathic.
Yeah,
like,
and
so,
Orcon is the one who ultimately does the selection at the end. So,
but the thing then is that is this is where again the right. I am going to kind of put a lot of this under the writing because Alcon's telepathy is a strange one because Carl, by the look of him, is about 16, maybe 17. He's of a similar age to Adric. So, like, and the selecting process, I presume, is once a year. So, like, if their whole thing about the stock is, like, like they haven't been good stock for ages, Alcon's telepathy should have picked up on Carl in the previous selection or the selection before that. So, it's again, like, I see, like, I do see where you're coming from, but when we first see Habris, he doesn't look like someone that's resigned to do this job when he says the time of selecting is at hand and he's told to go off. Like, he's not gleefully smiling, but nor is he like stone-faced and disheartened. And I get the impression of a guy that is trying to have his cake and eating it too, because he's a guard, he serves, he's loyal, he's kept okay inside the thing. But then he goes down and he makes the selection, and he also goes and he eats with the villagers, and tries to be pally with Ivo, knowing full well that he's eating into their food resources, despite the fact that Ivo repeatedly says we need more food because our harvests are poor because we don't have enough food allowance. And Haber says, like, I'm doing my best, but you're still coming down and you're still eating the food.
Yeah, you and I see that very differently.
Yeah.
Like, because the way I see Habris is, at the beginning, Habris believes in what they do. He has reverence for the lords. He understands his purpose. But he's not, like I said, he's not like Sheriff of Nottingham, best day ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nor is he like Tarek, who has become disillusioned. Habris' disillusionment comes as the story progresses, and decisions are being made that go against the tradition. It goes against what's come before. So there's that. In terms of him like playing pally and eating their food, I didn't see it that way. I saw it as like, because Habris himself was once a villager. And, I don't see it as like, oh, he's coming down and eating their food. Like, again, he's not Sheriff of Nottingham. Like, he didn't enter the eating hall and take food from someone's mouth and start munching down on it, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, when Ivo says, like, I've seen you eat with us. It didn't come across to me as like, you come in here and you eat our food and now you're going to do this. It came across as like, you ate with us. Emphasis on the word with, not on the word ate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No. I know. I get that, but it's like, and I do. At the end, yeah, there's the final shattering of the illusion that like you are nothing but fodder for the guards. But I think if he was as concerned for the villagers as, I don't know, I feel like that he would have tried maybe towards the end of part 3 or something, like feeding information to Ivo or something like that, like as a turncoat, that the Lords aren't what I once thought they were, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and this side of things.
Flip that around, though. He knows Ivo's son is dead.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I don't know. I just like again. I think my main point just goes back to the kind of start of who's to know about Carl's existence, and if you're going, and as you said, like Aucon's telepathic ability, why wasn't Carl selected sooner?
No, I don't mean that Aucon's telepathic ability is why he selected Carl. I'm saying that Aucon is telepathic.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Habers returns with poor stock, none of whom are strong enough to become guards, Aucon will then be like, what the hell is happening? He's like, oh, this is the strongest they have. He turns his attention and finds it.
Okay.
Do you know?
No, I see what you're saying now. I thought you meant that he could use his telepathic ability to scan the village for...
Yeah, no, he would eventually, if he's being told, this is the strongest stock we have, and he's like, I call bullshit.
Yeah.
Not that he's actively doing it all day, every day.
Yeah. No, I see that point there now. All right.
So shall we go on to Aucon and his two conspirators?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Zargo, Camilla, and Aucon.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it goes Zargo and Camilla are the same, and then Aucon is the worst. Would you agree?
As in, like, he is like the main villain of the trio. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree.
Because like for Zargo and Camilla, I'm just going to talk about them as one unit, right? Because that is essentially what they are.
Yeah.
They are so fucking annoying. I'm going to talk about it more in the overall, but the hammy performances are so ridiculous. The way they hold themselves, the way they react with each other, the way they stand, the way they deliver their lines, everything about it is just so irritating. It's ridiculous. The faces they make. You've got Aucon standing there looking stocky and serious, and the two of them behind going like a fucking child in a fucking play in primary school or something, playing a vampire. Yeah. It was ridiculous. The two of them are the biggest caricature of a character ever. Like I said, no offense to the actors, but like that wasn't the script wasn't great. Again, not great dialogue, but the performance, Jesus fucking Christ! Do you want some bread for your ham? Like what the fuck? Like that is my note on Zargo and Camilla. How about you?
Cool. I don't think I was as peeved as you are with the whole type shit when they were going full vampire. I would admit I was very distracted by Camilla for the whole story because she reminded me of Gillian Anderson in a black wig. Like the dynamic of the three of them I find is kind of interesting because Zargo was the captain, so he's now the king. Navigation officer was Camilla, so she's the queen. Maybe maybe there was a relationship between the two of them beforehand, because I don't see how a navigation officer would be unless she was like navigation officer and
he needs a queen, and there's only two other options. So
yeah. And then obviously the science officer, like that fucking makes a bit of sense. But Jesus, Zargo, he just bitches endlessly. Like his only real characteristic is that he's envious of Aucon, but he never confronts him about it. Like this is a prime recipe for like inter-rivalry in this sort of a group dynamic, and it's it's wasted. It's a wasted opportunity. And yeah, like it's just like he's just there. Now, so is Camilla, but I think Camilla's trait is that she's definitely the more bloodthirsty of the trio, because like she
Literally.
seems to, yeah, like she seems to relish the whole fuck it idea of like just a feeding frenzy, and anything to do, she's just like, let's just fucking kill them all.
I was curious if we were going to get a scene of her like sucking the blood out of Romana's finger.
Yeah, I was waiting for something like that, or getting the tissue that Romana was holding on her hand and like having a little nibble of that or something like that. Yeah, so like they're really just there to be the vampire king and queen, or the vampire lord and lady. Like Alcon is the real meat and bones of that trio. So do you want to go on to Alcon?
Yeah, because I agree with you. He's the most fleshed out of the three of them. And I think part of it is because he's not in a couple, like he stands alone amongst the three of them together as a group. So he's a loner out of the three of them. He does his own thing. And over hundreds of years, that means that these two are playing at being king and queen and are playing at being vampires and having a great fucking time doing it. Whereas Alcon is the one who has the connection to the Great One. You know, his mental powers are genuinely something to fear. They make him intimidating. They make him interesting. He's not hammy. Well, he's not as hammy as the other two. He's very much dedicated and focused, and that makes him more threatening. Like, my sense is that like he's the one who believes in the Great One. The other two are just along for the ride. And yeah, he lets them play being king and queen, but ultimately, when the Great One awakes, those two are fucking their fodder. Straight away. Like, his response to Adric, I think he would rather bring Adric into the fold and get rid of the other two.
Yeah.
Do you know? Like, he's just using them to give him a base of operations. He doesn't want to be involved with anything else. He's like, just let me do what I'm doing. You guys can play it whatever the fuck you want. And like, he's, like I said, to me, Alcon is the villain. The other two are playing at being the villain.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, I agree. Alcon is a very interesting character because he reminds me of someone, of another character. And it was just because we were talking recently about the Warhammer 40k universe. And he reminds me of a character called Lorgar, who is the first Primarch that is tainted by chaos. Because he's basically, his fate in the Emperor is shattered, and the Chaos Forces just latch onto it, and they might twist him into this perverted version of a Primarch that then converts all the others. But Alcon reminds me of that because he's the one that the Great One reached out to. Like, while they were in real space, he somehow managed to latch on to... Now, they say that he brought him into the CV, into E-Space. Maybe they just arrived there by accident, and once they got there, the Great One latched onto him. And I'm wondering why him specifically. Is it because he seems to be the only one with the psychic abilities? So maybe Anthony O'Connor had some sort of latent psychic ability within him that the Great One latched onto. Quite possibly. Or was it the Great One using his own mental abilities, scanned the three of them, and because Anthony O'Connor is the science officer, would make him more susceptible to influencing the investigation of the unknown, trying to catalog it, trying to get to the core of something. Whatever way it was, he embraced it. fully embraced it. And he may look like Balin from The Hobbit, but with a bowl cut. But he's the most intimidating of the three of them, without being a caricature of the Hammer-Horror vampire. Like he is intimidating, but he's also charismatic, because you could see Adric potentially falling for his line. And I like the sequence where he is at the selecting and he's like, mental shield. Someone is like, and he's like, he can sense it in Adric, and he's like, I can promise you. I was going to mention a character there, but I'm not going to, because I know you don't like this character. But he's one of those ones that can very easily trick people into following him along the path, you know? I really wish that there had been more interactions between him and the Doctor, or him and Romana. Because the more that he would talk, the less time there was for the other two, and potentially that there could have been time then to spare for the Great One. Although I will say, he is a bit of an idiot, because Romana is meant to be a sacrifice for the Great One. Why, oh why are you then feeding her to your bats? Unless they're going to each take a little bit of blood and then drop it into the hole where the Great One is, as a sort of like a weird bird type feeding.
Is the thing, the bat connection is never explained. I assumed the bats were an extension of the Great One.
Yeah, that could be it. I thought as well, because he was a science officer, maybe he kept specimens of animals.
Maybe, but I assumed that the sacrifices get eaten by the bats.
Yeah, and then
by some weird mumbo jumbo feeds the Great One.
Although no, because the blood is sucked out of each of the corpses and it's fed through a filtration system into the hole in the ground.
Oh, because I have no clue.
Yeah. God damn it, Terrence. So, very interesting overall character discussion, I think. So now come to the final part of the podcast, which is the overall discussion. So as you started us off with the characters, you get to start us off with your final thoughts. So your final thoughts and score, please.
So for me, this is a very 70s story, bookended with 80s credits. What I mean by that is the sets, the lighting, the camera setup, some of the dialogue is all very reminiscent of 70s Doctor Who, in particular early 70s Doctor Who. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's very jarring coming off of Full Circle last week. Which, for me, Full Circle was a really good episode. Shot really well, really interesting, whatever. But this seemed like a step backwards in terms of the modernization of the show. And like I said, it feeling like a 70s show isn't bad. I mean, a lot of our favorite stories come from the 70s around the show. But it just feels that in this 80s, revolution that they're doing with the show, it just sort of sticks out. Okay. But let's go into the things I liked. So I'm not gonna lie, there's not a whole lot in the things that I liked, which you may have gathered. For me, the concept was interesting, but more so the idea of a resistance rediscovering technology and how it works. That, for me, I found really interesting. The vampire story, not so much. I didn't find it interesting as a concept. I would have been perfectly happy if they had done the same type of thing, that those three were really old and they were doing like a Tau connection or something else to live longer, but making it like canonically vampires, I'm like, okay, not so much. I also, like I said, I quite like the Doctor's, lend me your ears, Men in Tights moment. Because that was quite cool. And actually, now that we've gone through our conversation, I did quite like some of our supporting characters. Again, more so the idea of them. So, Haberus and Tarek, I think, were interesting characters. But the negatives. Oh, the acting. It was so over the top. Like, it was pure amateur dramatics, and it was fucking painful to watch. Right from the very first scene. Like, when... What was Ivo's wife's name? Marta or whatever?
Marta, yeah.
Herself, like... Lady, what show are you in? Do you know? And like, when their son gets taken away, the sort of like... I don't, even just the way they hugged and the way they spoke to each other and held themselves in the scene, it was just so over the top. And then you've got those two fuckers, like Zargo and Camilla. Like, I'm convinced those actors were high as fuck, because, like, what were they on? Do you know? Doctor Who isn't like serious storytelling, do you know? But at the same time, if you compare it to the one that actually kept going to me was Time Warrior. Similar type of feel in terms of we've got lords, we've got peasants, we've got whatever. Similar type of dialogue in the sense of like the medieval-esque dialogue. But they played it straight. Whereas here, no one is playing it straight.
Yeah.
And it's very off-putting. Adric was just poorly written. Like, they talked about the idea behind his actions in the trivia section. We talked about it in the start discussion. But I think he was just poorly written. I don't think they had a fucking clue what they wanted to do with him. And then, for me, the contrivance behind how the TARDIS has the special information that they need in order to save the day. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if that's written down anywhere. When did this happen? Oh, it's in the Book of Rassilon. Oh, did you know that a certain type of TARDIS would have that Book of Rassilon, and it just so happens to be the one that you have? Holy fucking shit. She could just say, every TARDIS has one.
Yeah.
Why specifically his? And then when we get there, it's actually not in the system. It's in an actual physical format. And he used to do this weird, stupid, punchy up thing. And then, guess what? Guess what the solution is, Paddy? It's a stake through the heart. Which, if the Doctor's aware of vampire myth, he fucking knew already. Like, what did he learn from that MacGuffin that, like, a 5-year-old couldn't have figured out? Nothing. And do you know what the worst thing was?
What?
I was bored.
Okay.
Throughout the whole thing, I was bored. Do you know, I've forgotten half of it. I only watched it yesterday. Which, compared to Full Circle, which we talked about last week, like, we took a week off between watching Full Circle and recording it because I was sick. But literally that whole week that we weren't recording, I was thinking about more and more in relation to Full Circle. I struggled to write notes for our characters because I found them really boring and kind of shit. So for me, it's a 2. And I think that's being generous.
Cool.
How about you?
So, I I'm not going to lie. When I first finished the story, it was kind of riding high. I think it was riding at about a 3.75, but I had to rewatch it again because I realized that I actually couldn't think of anything for my character notes after I finished doing the recap. So I went back through it and I realized that, you know what, this isn't actually as good as I first thought it was going. I first thought it was, and I think what sucked me in was like there was the horror element to it. Like I didn't mind the vampire lore side of things because I like vampires, and if you can do a nice cool twist on it, that's pretty cool. I like the concept of the Time Lords fighting a big group of giant vampire races. Just reminds me of Underworld. But the characters were the majority of the characters were surprisingly weak. Bad dialogue, as we talked about. Poor pacing, poor exposition. And I just found like that I was actually kind of giving it props for the aesthetic and some of the like Tarek's performance mainly, and Ivo's. Fair, like my hat is off to the costume and makeup department because I liked the look of everything, and I also liked that crumbling aging sequence for the three vampires. I thought that was done really, really well. But there was just a lot in the story that, as we were having our character discussion, that was like, yeah, this isn't actually as good as I first thought it was. So I've actually knocked it down to a 2.5.
Okay. Not as low as mine, but I don't know. I just think like compared to last week.
Oh, it's not as good as last week.
It's just so completely different. And like you mentioned Underworld, I'm a huge Underworld fan. You know that.
Yeah.
But I think, and like we've loved the Hammer horror stories we've had up until now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had Frankenstein's monster in Brain of Morbius. Brain of Morbius is great. We've had the Mummy, obviously, in Pyramids of Mars. To do Hammer horror properly, though, you have to play it straight.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this was all ham.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a waste of a vampire story. And the fact that they were actually having it be Dracula, I'm like, no, like, as in they were actually tying it into the Dracula myth. I'm like, no, just, again, think about Brain of Morbius, which was essentially Frankenstein's monster. But they didn't outright call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? The audience was allowed to make the connection themselves. Like, had they just had it be three beings who are draining people's life forces, and have the blood thing if you want, that's fine. But don't have bats. Don't give them fangs. Don't have them hamming it up like there's no fucking tomorrow. Like, I was half expecting at one point your man to run around with his cape just pretending or whatever, do you know what I mean? It could have been so much better than it was. And it's disappointing from last week because I thought last week, like, we'd both jumped a fair bit in our scores. And I was like, oh, this is great now, we're getting into it. Mm-hmm. The E-Space trilogy, you know, well regarded for the most part. You know, people know about it. But no, it didn't match up. So it's going to be interesting to see if next week's story is going to, like, is it just, you know, a good sandwich with one poor filling?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just a downhill trajectory? We'll have to wait and see. So next week is Warriors Gate.
Mm-hmm. So join us then, folks, and as always, please let us know your thoughts. If you agree with us, if you didn't agree with us, if you picked up something that we missed, please let us know.
Yeah. Until next week, though.
Bye.